Hello, good people of the world. I am Alfonso Robinson. Welcome to Relationship Real Talk, Live the Life's podcast.
And I'm Ashley Albertson. And for over 20 years, we've been dedicated to strengthening marriages and families through relationship education. For more information about us, you can visit us at livethelife.org, and we hope you enjoy today's podcast. And welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to be interviewing William. He is the executive pastor at Downtown Community Church, and he's also a husband and a father who's actually expecting his third child.
Heyo.
Whoop, whoop. So, William, you are really, really good at relationships. I think anyone who knows you knows that. And I've actually had the privilege of working with you and seeing firsthand how direct and effective you are, but also how genuinely you care about the people you manage. So that doesn't just happen by accident. It's a purposeful thing that you have to try and do. So can you tell us a little bit about that journey?
Yeah. Wow. Heck of an introduction there. Yeah. Thank you guys for having me on. I'm super excited to be here. So you're asking me, how have I kind of managed like relationships, growing relationships? Well, as an Enneagram 2, no, I'm just kidding.
Honestly, me too.
we won't go too deep in the Enneagram today, but, man, I don't know. Like from a young age, I've always been like passionate about relationships and individuals, people. So it's something that I realize doesn't come naturally for everybody. But I'd say for me pretty early on, it kind of came pretty naturally. But at the same time, like, as you get older, you have to be more intentional about your relationships. And so one of my like lifelong goals has always been, there's a group of guys that I've been friends with since high school. And I'm like, I want to be friends with them my whole life. I remember at some point in college, kind of like looking around and kind of, talking to my parents or talking to other people and like, oh yeah, like we used to be friends with them and things happen, life happens, whatever. But I was like, man, I don't want to do that. I want to be the person that's like, connected with even just my friends, right? For 50, 60 years. We talk about that with marriage, right? And like, of course, we all want to have healthy marriages and want to be with our spouse for our whole life as long as we can. But, do we also apply that to friendships and relationships? And so even though, two of those guys don't live here in town, we're constantly texting, make sure I call them once a week. So things like that.
That's awesome. And I'm just going to throw you like a curveball. You brought up Enneagram, so I'm going to just go with it. But so as an Enneagram 2, you're really good at the love, obviously. If you know anything about Enneagram, we're really good lovers. But how do you balance that with being a manager and being a leader in your church? Like how did you find that balance of you're really good at relationships, but also you got to be really good at having boundaries?
Yeah, that's super hard. So, okay, it's probably a longer answer than you're expecting, but I'll kind of walk you through it. So, as Ashley said, I'm the executive pastor at Downtown Community Church, and Ben Kempfer is lead pastor there. Ashley was part of it as well, kind of helped launching the church about 8 years ago, which is kind of hard to believe.
That's crazy, yeah.
But, kind of early on, it was just volunteering, helping out, worship leader, so leading worship and naturally just kind of getting more involved. Well, eventually he came on staff full time and I was the only staff member for years. And so it was like I did it all. I put the slides in, I'd, send out the emails, I'd, whatever cleaned, whatever needed to get done, right? As just like, let's make sure it happens. So for years, that was my role. And I'm naturally a get stuff done kind of guy. So I love checklists. I love completing checklists. Speaking your love language, right?
Yes.
Like getting things done. And, that's just kind of how I operate. Well, eventually we had to transition as we grew and we needed to expand our staff in order for us as a church to grow. And so I had to kind of transition to not just the doer, but like the manager as well. So that alone was like a tough transition. And so early on, the way I managed people was just by loving them and caring for them. And I did that for a long time. And it was very ineffective. It did not work well. And a good friend of mine, Pastor Adrian Crawford, like he brought up to me, we were just talking church staff, church culture, and, kind of looking at it and kind of saying, man, how can what am I doing wrong? Like what's going on here that like I need to change? I realize I need to change. What needs to happen? And he said something that was, it clicked for me, but he said, your issue is it's a discipleship issue. And so you have to view the people that you manage as disciples, and you're discipling them. And so I started to, change the way, realizing, okay, I need to be more strict with schedules, or I need to be more strict with, the way I expect timelines for projects and things like that. And that's not a unloving thing to do, but that's a discipleship thing to do, right? It's not so much, or in my head at first it was, man, I'm not caring for them enough. I'm not loving them enough. I'm not, it's unloving for me to say, hey, I need this done by Tuesday at noon, right? Well, really it's a discipleship issue. I need to teach them, man, when we have a task that's in front of us and like the Lord's called us to do it, like we need to be diligent in getting it done and getting it done well. And for me to say, hey, this isn't good enough, like we need this to be better, like that's a discipleship issue there. So that's probably a much longer answer. And I don't know if I fully like answered that, but going back to an Enneagram 2, like my tendency is just kind of like nurture and love people through management. Mm-hmm. And I realized my way of doing that isn't the way to get things done. I had to be more strict and kind of and realize that's more of a discipleship thing.
Yeah, I love that, because I've struggled with that too, and just trying to find not only just the motivation, but also just like kind of the courage to be like, hey, I need to hold you accountable, because it does feel like something that's not loving or not kind. But someone once told me, like, is it really kind and loving to let someone sit in how they are and not push them to be better? Is that really loving them the best way? And I kind of think of that when I do have to try and hold someone accountable, because I want to make them better.
We look at like our lives, right? Like there's moments in our life where we were challenged and we were pushed and like it was uncomfortable and we didn't like it, but at the end of the day we grew from it, right? And so it's, in some ways it's kind of realizing, oh yeah, like I am that person for them. Like like we tend to not think of ourselves like that, but we are. So.
Absolutely.
And plus my dad always told me, if you're in a organization, for example, and somebody is lacking, they're in this organization for a reason, and clearly they love it. So it's irresponsible for you as the leader to have them neglect something that they said that they love.
Yeah,
so
that's good.
That's always something I like to refer to.
Yeah.
With all of that, what resources did you find to help you out through all of this?
So I think, a couple things. One is this is so uncommon in our society, but having people in our lives that we allow to speak into it, right? I have to make sure, and we all have to make sure we have those men and women in our life that have the authority to speak into where we have shortcomings, right? Because we all have them, right? And so Ben Kempfer and myself have been meeting Friday mornings for since we started the church, so at least 8 years, and we spend a couple hours just talking life and accountability. And there's times where we call each other out and it's uncomfortable, and we got to say things. But, in like the example I just gave, like giving Pastor Adrian the authority to say, hey, I know I'm not succeeding in this area. Like, what am I doing wrong? And letting him speak into that, I think is huge. So I think that's one. I think the other thing is it's 2020 and there are endless amounts of podcasts and books and resources that we have that we can be listening to, that we can be, reading. So a couple, I'll pull up my phone, a couple that like are my go-tos. Like Craig Rochelle's leadership podcast is like a must. It's 20 minutes a month. And it's just like a gold mine. Carey Nieuwhof, his leadership podcast has a ton of stuff. There's a book I just started called Deep Work, which is a great book. So yeah, I think there's tons of resources that are out there that we can constantly, a lot of times we think, mentor or things like that it has to be somebody that I'm physically meeting with. The reality is there's not a lot of people in your life that have the time to kind of do that on a regular basis, but I can sit under Craig Groeschel for 20 minutes. I'm in. I'll take that.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to also just like appreciate you, because I remember when we were meeting, you would give me those resources as well. And just having the heart to share what you're learning is so rare. And I think a lot of the time people they're just trying to make themselves better and they're just trying to push themselves forward. But again, you have that mentality of, I'm learning. It was really awesome. I want to share it with you.
Yeah.
And I absolutely loved Craig Groeschel's podcast. It's amazing. Again, I would recommend it to a lot of different people. But I will say, so in your journey of growing into this leadership role, what were some of the experiences that you had? You talked a little bit about how you were loving people and trying to disciple them that way. But what are some maybe positive and negative experiences that you had that maybe pushed you into being the leader that you are?
Man, just trying to like call me out. No, I'm just kidding. I'm still learning. Gosh, I'm learning a ton of different things. I think one is like it's almost like parenting. Like my dad said this from I don't know, since we had our first son, like you have to parent every kid different. And actually I remember him saying that with my little brother, because he would do, my parents would do things with I'm the oldest of 3. And so like my little brother's 5 years younger, he would get away with stuff. And I'd be like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? But they always said, no, you got to parent different. You got to parent each kid different. And I didn't get that until I had kids. And now like having my kids be like, oh yeah, they're pretty different. And so I think managing is the same way. Every person that I manage, every person that I lead, I have to lead differently. There's some people that I need to sit down with almost daily and be like, okay, what are we working on? What task are we doing? What things are we doing? And there's other people that, man, I can say, here's what I want to get done. Here's the big picture, and they can take it and run with it. And so, and realizing that that's okay. I can't manage every person the same. So I'd say like number one failure is I've tried to just put everybody in the same box, so now having, I don't know, this is probably bad. I probably should know how many people are on our team, but let's say 10, 8 to 10 people that are on our like staff that, I have to manage each one different. So from that, I've seen, but at the same time, realizing that there has to be clear communication, overly clear communication to the point where it's like annoying, right? And so it's so easy to like, I know this needs to happen, but I just don't communicate it, So you can apply that to relationships. You can apply that to managing. You can apply it to it all, right? Learning to overly communicate and to, just manage every relationship differently.
So you said that you manage each person differently. Would you say that's the biggest advice you would give to anybody that's trying to create that perfect balance?
I think so. Yeah, I think that, realizing, well, kind of back to what I said, like it's a discipleship thing, right? And so if you are discipling, 2 or 3 different guys, right? Each one's in a different spot. Each one's in a different level of their walk with Christ and what they're learning and what they're going through. And so, man, it's the same as like, if I view it like that, it's like, okay, yeah, I can manage this.
For sure.
Yeah. And I love how we've been talking about how you have this amazing leadership role in the church, but also you're an amazing husband. And I have watched your relationship with Jules since I was in middle school. Y'all were in high school. So like probably a decade of watching you guys together. And it's honestly, you guys have such a beautiful, respectful, and loving relationship that I absolutely admire. And you do a really amazing job of being the leader and loving your wife well in that relationship. So another thing we wanted to talk about today was today's culture. There's a lot of women, even Christian women, who have problems with man being, head of the household. Even, the scripture, Ephesians 5:22-23, where it says, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife. I think that rubs a lot of women the wrong way. And, DCC is actually a very young church demographically, and there's a lot of women. So how have you kind of addressed this in that church setting?
First off, thank you for your compliments. It's very kind of you. My wife, we just celebrated 10 years of marriage this past December, which is fantastic. I think live life for, getting us started on the right foot. I'd say first off, like it starts in our household. So a lot of times, people look at, Ephesians 5, and they see that wives submit to your husbands and think of this like, the husband is like, defeating the wife and like suppressing the wife. Well, actually, like you operate as a team, right? And when just like any team, like there needs to be a leader, right? And that doesn't mean that somebody plays a lesser part just because there's somebody that's a leader. So I think the other side of that is like, Ephesians 5:25 says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So as a husband, my role is to love my wife to the point where I'm giving myself up to her, and I'm sacrificing. And so, for us as a household, how we operate is, there are decisions that like, we make as a team, right? And there's something that like, that we're constantly going to be in communication about and talking about. And there's decisions that I'm going to do what Jewel feels called to do because that's how I can love her and serve her. And there's things that we're going to do that I feel called to do because that's how she's going to honor and let me lead our family. So, I think I love this passage of scripture because it really talks about both sides submitting to one another, right? Rather than, okay, and we like to just take one verse out of the passage and just say, no, you submit. It's like really Christ is calling us both to lay down our lives and lay down our wills so we can do this together. And so yeah, it's like like a football team, right? Just because you have a quarterback that's the leader doesn't mean the running back or the offensive line or whatever it is isn't important, right? And doesn't play a valuable role on that team. So as a church, man, we fully believe in taking those gifts that everybody in our church has and calling them out and using them. And by no means are we perfect at this, but it's something that we're constantly striving in to say, okay, Ashley, I know you have the gift of teaching. Like, how can we take that gift and call it out and help you encourage the body and, reach our community by doing that. That doesn't mean you need to be the head pastor of the church, but that also doesn't mean you can't play any role here.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
So. I was trying to think of something that he summed it up perfectly. I was actually going to bring up the point how people tend to forget how when we talk about leadership, a leader knows how to fall back and let somebody else lead. So that goes in perfectly of how you were describing everything, how sometimes your wife might be have a stronger skill set in something. So go ahead and let her take charge. It's not
she is way smarter than me. So there's a lot of things that I'm like, exactly. Hey, you go ahead, you take it.
Even with my girlfriend, there's a lot of things that you can take control. So it's all yours. It's your world. I'm living in it.
Yeah.
But that was perfect.
Yeah. And I'll say, so just from some of the women that I've talked to, I think this biblical perspective comes from a worldly hurt where they don't understand that, God isn't calling them to submit to someone who's going to hurt them. God's not calling them to submit to someone that's going to abuse this power.
Sure.
He's calling them to submit to their husbands who are following Christ. And I was reading this book that Andy Stanley wrote, and he was talking about how this exact kind of thing came up. And he was at a wedding, and one of the bridesmaids was kind of getting on to him about, hey, why is God telling women to, lay down all the rights and whatever. Yeah. So he kind of laid it out for her, and he was like, well, let me ask you a question. Let's say you meet a man and he is devoted to you and he adores you and he thinks that, you just hung the moon, and he is respectful towards you and he is kind to you and he wants to, give you the world, and he's really all for you. He's your biggest cheerleader, and just kind of keeps describing this Christ-like man. And she goes, well, where's that guy and how can I marry him? Like, I don't have a problem following that guy. And I think that as women, we haven't experienced that kind of man.
Sure.
Because we have such low standards sometimes for ourselves. And so we see this scripture and we see these past men that we've dated and that we've been with, and we're like, well, I'm not going to submit to that kind of person. But again, we're being called to submit to someone who is following Christ and is trying to look like Christ. And that person will, just a few verses later, the word says he is going to lay down his life for you.
Sure.
And that's not someone that's going to take that leadership role lightly. Exactly like you were saying, how, you're going to say, Jewel, yeah, you've got let's go that way. Yeah. And listening to the other person. And I think when we get in that headspace where we see the actual kind of man that God wants for us as women, that's where it's like, okay, I wouldn't mind submitting to that person who I know has my best interest at heart. And I also love your analogy of the football, RIP Seminoles and fall football.
No, it's happening, man. It's happening. We're
I know. You just got to pray, got to hope. But I love that, because the quarterback, everyone's like, oh, I want to be a quarterback. But, how often does the quarterback make the touchdown? And, it's a team effort. You're not, to score the points, you need the team. You can't just have a quarterback on the field. So I love that analogy.
And it's, I'd say to your point too, like with, women being like, well, where's that guy? That is the question. Where is that guy? We need more guys like that, there's such a huge push in the Christian community and just society as general of just like, guys, you're not being who God's called you to be, and we need you to step up and do it. Unfortunately, this is because there's a lot of dads that are missing, so a lot of examples that are gone. But encouragement to the women is hold strong, right? Don't compromise because you haven't had that example, but just to keep doing what God's called you to do, keep pressing forward, and fellas step up and be that example, for them. So, that's being a husband and being a dad, like, God tells us that's our number one ministry, right? And it's such a weight of like, man, I'm called, like, even though I'm pastoring a church, like I'm called first and foremost to like lead my family, right? And to we talk about like, the balance and the struggle there of like, man, how am I balancing home life and ministry and work and everything that's happening? It's a struggle, but like we have to realize, man, the number one call I have to answer is like leading my home well. So
yeah, I really like that. Well, thank you, William, so much for coming on with us. I really, really appreciate you. I do think you're one of those men that absolutely is one of those people to look to be that godly example of what a good husband looks like.
You're super kind for saying that. I appreciate it.
No, I mean, I'm not just saying it. I've seen you for the past decade live that way, live your life that way. And I have been in your home, and I have seen you and Jewel interact. And, I know it's not all, rainbows and kittens, but even in the times where you're frustrated, it's still frustration with respect and frustration with that mutual affection. So I think that that's beautiful.
Sure. Well, I'll give a shout out to, one, obviously I'm thankful to have great parents that have set the example and grandparents that have set the example in front of me, but also to the Albertson family and to, I was a part of champions growing up, and Richard and Elizabeth, and them opening their home and setting that example. And the more mentors we can have in our life that set that example for us, the better off we'll be. So shout out to Live Life and Richard for being that for me as well.
And again, thank you for coming. It was nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you
too. Thanks everybody for listening. We hope you feel educated, encouraged, and empowered to thrive in whatever relationship you're in. Thank you and have a good one.